Well, good morning to you all. You were very fortunate just then. I was literally about to take my first breath to speak when James said there were coffees and teas. So you just got in. So hopefully you've all got them. And can I suggest you keep your cups for the day so that you can use them again? Hello, good to see you again, and welcome to those of you who weren't able to make it last night and are joining us for the first time. Very good to have you with us. Last night, just to orient you for those who weren't able to be here, last night I was speaking about Genesis 1. I focused my talk on Genesis 1 and contrasted that with the Babylonian creation narrative and used that as a way to get us thinking about what the Bible says about who God is as creator, who this world is, and then our place, what the Bible says is our place in this world. And I won't repeat it, but I did that. And so we laid a foundation for the rest of our day or for the rest of our conference, as now today we're getting deeper into this theme of Gaia, of this amazing world that we are standing and sitting underneath, and of God's mission and our place within that. And I know that there are all sorts of fab workshops and seminars that are going to be happening as you hear from people who are involved in this and as we talk and share and learn from each other. I want us to think this morning about Gaia in crisis and how we respond to that. By which I don't mean that I'm going to spend the next half an hour or so going through all of the terrible things that is happening to our world, because I don't need to do that. We know that, and I suspect you're here because you know that and because you want to respond. But more, I want to think about the reality of living in a world in crisis, and how do we keep going? How do we keep taking action? In some ways, this ought to come at the end of the day when you've been having your workshops and your seminars, but I hope that what I say is going to give you some tools that you can then take out from here and into the rest of your life and your ministry and whatever it is that you do. I probably ought to introduce myself for those of you who weren't here yesterday. So I'm Ruth, Valerio, and I live down on the south coast in Chichester with actually I don't live with them anymore, two beautiful grown-up daughters, and have been involved in issues of local, community and international, global issues around social justice and environmental care for a good number of decades now, outworked in various contexts. And I'm currently the Programs, Partnerships and Advocacy Director for an organisation called Embrace the Middle East, which supports local churches, local Christian organisations in the Middle East as they tackle poverty and injustice in their communities and environmental breakdown as well. So we support work in Egypt, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Israel and Palestine, Gaza and the West Bank. I've brought some literature, you can pick that up over there if you'd like to find out more of the work that we do. Actually, we don't do any work. It's all about the work that our partners do that we support. But if you'd like to find out more about the work of Christians in the Middle East, then do pick up some of the literature. Some of you, I know, already know of Embrace the Middle East through the Bethlehem Carol sheet that you might well use in your churches, and that's the organisation that produces that. So that's who I am. And as I say, I've been writing, speaking, trying to live out issues of environmental care for many, many years now. And for a good number of years, or quite some time ago, and I don't remember how long ago, I had this, I don't want to call it a vision, like the apocalypse or something, but I had this picture that came to me of a group of people walking down the road, chatting quite happily, and behind them was this massive sandstorm that was coming, or this huge storm, just this sort of black storm that was coming. And they were chatting away, oblivious to the fact that this storm was about to engulf them. And this was a picture that I carry with me for years around the environmental and the climate crisis. That we're just happily walking down the road, chatting with each other, and behind us is this looming disaster that is about to engulf us. And for many years, I spoke about that. I didn't really talk about that picture, but that was the picture that I had in my mind as I've sort of spoken all around the place to churches, conferences in this country and in other countries as well. Really, and I'm realizing that I've basically, in a number of different ways, been saying the same thing year after year after year, which is that there's a crisis coming. This is why, as Christians, we need to respond, and this is what we can do about it. And if we take action, we can avert the crisis. Then some years ago, in my role of formerly, I was a director at Tear Fund, and one of the things I did there was oversee the media team. And I would be given every morning a breakdown of the headlines of that day. And one morning, sitting at my desk as the paper headlines got sent to me, the media headlines got sent to me, I looked at the list of everything that was in the papers, and I thought, we're there. This crisis isn't coming anymore. It's here. Everything that I had been saying, standing on the shoulders of brilliant scientists, not my own thinking, but from what the climate scientists have been saying, everything that I'd been talking about for years, PowerPoints that I would put up in the days before PowerPoints. I remember doing acetates with some of these things on it, increasing drought, increasing flooding, environmental refugees, fires, crops being ruined, bleaching of the coral reefs, species dying because of the climate crisis, and so on. All of these things was just there on this one day in front of me. And I thought, wow, that storm behind us actually is here now. It's engulfed us. And so I began to ask myself, well, what do I need to change in my messaging, that it's now not anymore about the crisis coming, it's we are living in a climate crisis, and how do we respond to that? Psychologically, what does it do to us? And what about for me? I've been speaking about this stuff for so long, and it's only getting worse. How do I keep going with that? Well, there's a part of me, quite honestly, that just wants to curl up under the duvet and say, it's all too much, I'm not coming out again. It's all too depressing and I can't face it. And there's a part of me that says, oh, well, stuff it. We can't do anything about it. We're never going to change it. I'm not going to bother anymore. And there's a part of me that gets incredibly angry, and a part of me that despairs. How do I deal with that? And I know, if there's one thing I know, it's that I can't succumb to any of that, because it still matters how we live. It still matters what action we take. We may have tipped over into a certain place, but it still matters today what we do. because we still do have the power in our hands as to how bad it's going to continue to be and how bad it's going to be in the future. And so I know I cannot afford just to throw my hands up in the air in despair and say, it's all too much, I'm not going to bother anymore. So how do I keep going? How do we keep going? And I want to offer you 6 tools that I've been thinking about as to, I guess really for me, as to what helps me to keep going. And so I want to offer these to you as well this morning. So 6 points for how we face the storm, how we face a Gaia, a world that's in crisis. My first point is hold on to your vision. I think each one of us here is here because we have a vision. And it will be for different things. It may well be for creation care, for environmental care. There may be other things that we are passionately concerned about as well. It may be things in our local community. It may be refugees or food banks or women or men facing domestic violence. There may be a whole range of things. But I want to ask you, what vision has God placed in your heart? What are the things that you care most deeply about? Maybe it's plastic and recycling. What's that thing that really gets you going and that you want to see change? Each one of us will have those things in our hearts that God has given to us. And together, all of those things form part of the wider vision of the kingdom of God that we see in the scriptures. There isn't the time here to unpack that in its fullness, but the kingdom of God is about justice and righteousness and peace and the flourishing of all creation. You think of Jesus' words in Luke 4 as he quotes from Isaiah 61 and refers to the year of the Jubilee. That Jubilee, those Jubilee commands in the Old Testament were about a radical resetting where things had got too unequal, where there was injustice and poverty and oppression in the land. The Jubilee was to reset, to start things off again. It was about liberation, wasn't it? Liberation for slaves, liberation for those who had got themselves into too much debt, liberation for the natural world as well. And you'll know that the laws of the Sabbath and then the Jubilee also applied to the wider world and to the animals as well. There's so much in the Bible that we could unpack, but it's this vision of justice, of peace, of righteousness, of the flourishing of the natural world that is the big picture vision, a vision of the reconciliation of all things. That's the big picture vision within which each of our personal, individual visions. We might call them callings, but sometimes that might put a bit too much pressure on us if we're not sure that we have a particular calling. But, our own individual passions, the things that we care about. You care about those things because they are part of the wider picture, the wider vision that we have in our scriptures. So hold on to your vision. Just very quickly in your mind, identify to yourself, what are those things that I'm passionate about? What are the things that I think God has lain on my heart? And hold on to that. God has given you those things for a reason. And then secondly, acknowledge the pain. I was chatting with one of my colleagues recently who is a seasoned humanitarian worker. He's lived in Afghanistan, in Sudan, in some of the hardest and toughest places. He used to work for a landmine, an anti-landmine organisation, one of the organisations that would go out and actually do the landmine clearance. So he's a seasoned humanitarian, and he has seen it all, and he's lived through it all. He was in Afghanistan when Afghanistan had to be evacuated, not this most recent one, the one before. So he's seen it all, and we were chatting, and we're now working together around with Israel and Gaza and the situation there. And we were reflecting, and he said to me, I don't think I've ever really felt or acknowledged a deep anger like this. And it's rocking me to the core. And he said how he keeps crying, and he finds himself of an evening after a day of work sitting out, this was over the summer, sitting out in the garden crying. And we got on to talking about lament and grief. And I've had similar conversations with other colleagues as well about the importance of acknowledging the pain. I know for myself, I've talked a lot about hope. I'm asked to talk about hope everywhere I go. And I've done tours called Hope for Planet Earth. And I'm asked at pretty much every talk that I do I have hope, and so on. So I've talked a lot about hope. And then I realized at one point that actually I jumped to hope too quickly. And I didn't allow myself to acknowledge the pain that is happening. And we are facing a world that is collapsing. We are facing a world, as we mentioned yesterday, that is drowning in plastic. We are facing a world that we are altering just unbelievably. We are facing a world that is mired in pollution and filth that is of our own making. We are facing a world that is being, not literally, turned upside down because of the changing patterns, the changing weather patterns. We are facing species that can't keep up with the pace, that are at risk of going extinct because now their food sources aren't coming at the time that they would have come, and they can't feed their young, and etc., etc., etc. I look just at the area around me, and I know that it's so different from how it was. My parents, who are now in their 90s, when they moved into the place that they live in, or used to live in Hertfordshire, it was full of butterflies. They would have clouds of butterflies. And now in their garden, they'll comment if they see one. You know, this is awful. And it can be easy just to rush on, to carry on our days and not actually really allow ourselves to look at the horror full in its face. And I know for me, there are times, I can't live in this place all the time because I can't function if I do. But there are times when I have to allow myself to cry and to really feel the pain of what is happening, of what we are doing to this planet and to all of its inhabitants, both human and wider. And you know, psychologists would agree that, well, you will know, if you've been through any sort of trauma or grief, one of the most important first steps is simply to acknowledge it, and to acknowledge how you feel, and to acknowledge the emotions that you carry. So I wonder, as you think about what is happening in our world today, what are some of the words that you might say? How do you feel? I feel angry, I feel devastated, I feel sad, I feel hopeless, I feel lonely, I feel overwhelmed. You know what, if we had time, if I had time to give you a few minutes, what would be some of those words that you might jot down as to how you feel. And one of the wonderful things about our scriptures is that they provide us with the resources for lament. Lament and grief aren't things that go against our faith. They're very much part of our faith. A third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. The prophet Jeremiah, you will know, is often called the prophet of lament. There are strong, powerful words that we have in our scriptures that we can draw on and use. And one of the things that I know you will know about Jeremiah and the other prophets and the different Psalms of lament is that they move through lament and always finish on a note of praise and of hope. And that isn't me saying that we have to move through lament, put it to one side and finish in that place. But I think there's something for us in holding lament and hope together. And we'll probably kind of switch between the two on different days and at different periods of our lives. So a strong encouragement from the scriptures not to turn our eyes away from the pain and the suffering, but to acknowledge it, to lament, and to hold that together, also with praise and with hope. Thirdly, find your community. One of the things that we know is that troubles and pain and heartache and grief are harder to face when we face them on our own. And when we talk with other people, when we meet with other people, that sense of overwhelm can diminish. There is power in being with others. There is power simply in talking with others. I have a best friend, and she doesn't live near me, but we message a lot. And together, over the decades, we've each been through all sorts of ups and downs in our lives, and some quite significant downs, as happens to all of us. And we have learnt, mostly we message and then we meet up every now and then when we can. We've learned if one of us is feeling particularly low, the other will say, "Shall we have a quick phone call?" And instead of messaging, we'll get on the phone and have a chat. And we always finish by saying, "Isn't it amazing what a difference it's made just to talk?" It hasn't changed the situation, hasn't changed the trouble, but you know, a trouble shared is a trouble halved. Actually, there is something in that. And there is power in community. I can remember many, many years ago doing some academic study around all of these issues, and sitting at my desk doing some reading, came across a quote by a guy called Henry David Thoreau, who's one of the founders of the wilderness movement and the simplicity movement in the States back in I think it's the 1800s. And he said, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that you live alone, you learn to live alone in a world of wounds. So one of the penalties, one of the downsides of an ecological education, of knowing what's happening in our world today, is that you feel like you're living alone in a world of wounds. And I was kind of in academic mode sitting at my desk, but I read this quote and I burst into tears because I knew it was how I felt. I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. This was decades ago, before I linked up with groups like Arosha and others and discovered that actually there were other strange people like me. But this was, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago or so, when the kind of things we're talking about today weren't being talked about so much. And you were seen as a bit strange and weird if you were interested and cared about the wider world. Thankfully, we are not on our own. And this is testimony to that. I earlier this year ran a climate retreat at a retreat centre in London. Probably, no, a little bit less than this. But the idea was to bring climate activists together and to give them space and time to reflect and have some time out from what they're doing. So there'd be a little bit of input from me, but then lots of space and time for reflection. And we started off just going around saying who we were, and why we'd come for that day. And one by one, people talked about how lonely they felt, how overwhelmed they were, how depressed they were from the state of the world. And then they started saying a bit about what they were doing and the different ways by which they were involved. And by the time we'd gone round and heard from everybody, before I could get into the next session, then someone started reflecting on what they'd heard, and someone else did. And they all began saying, oh, it's so wonderful to know that I'm not alone. So good to know I'm not the only person to feel like this. So encouraging to hear about what you're doing and what you're doing, and to know that there are other people taking action. And through the day, I was, I couldn't get them to behave, and I couldn't get them to stop talking with each other. So my idea was that they were going to have lots of time and space and silence and holy retreat and reflection. Every time I sent them off with some carefully crafted questions to spend time around the garden with their notebooks, I would look out and they'd be in little groups chatting, and they'd be sitting under the tree or on a bench. And when after coffee or lunch, I couldn't get them back into the session. Or when I'd finished the session and I wanted to send them out, they would stay in the room talking. And I felt like a teacher with unruly school children, until of course it dawned on me. Of course, they've come and they found community. What a beautiful thing. And then I realized what a God-given gift was unfolding that day. And all of them went away feeling like the weight had lifted off their shoulders. They had met others who also cared. Community is so important for us. Community can give us accountability. Maybe we're part of a climate group where we make commitments about actions that we're going to take, and then we come back the next week or the next month and we report back on how that action has gone. Community is a brilliant way by which we can make a difference. We can all do different things on our own, but we know that when we act together, we are powerful and we will make a difference. And it's been my pleasure and privilege to be part of a number of different campaigns and advocacy initiatives that have brought together people from all across the country to push the government to make a change on something. When we stand together, when we speak together, we have power and we can make a difference. The best community, of course, is church. And I know some of you might hear that with a slight wry smile on your faces and think, well, that's not what my church is like. It's not a great community when it comes to environmental care. And I hear that and I understand that. And I just encourage you to keep going and don't give up with your church. The church at its best should be, can be, will be, is in many cases a wonderful example of people living in community together, taking care of each other, taking care of others in their community, taking care of the wider world. And I know in some of the workshops, you'll be hearing some great examples of that. So community, find your community. I just want to ask you, where is your community? Do you have other people around you who can support you and encourage you and keep you going when you're feeling like you just want to despair? If you do, that's wonderful. Invest in that community. Invest in your friends. Don't be such activists that you don't have time for friendship. Friendships are so important. And if you don't, I encourage you to connect, chat with people here over coffee, over lunch, maybe get some numbers. I'm sure you will find avenues for community in the different workshops that you're in. And remember that you are not alone in what you are doing. There are multitudes of us in this country and around the world who are working, acting to take care of this world. So hold on to your vision, acknowledge the pain, find your community, and then fourthly, and if you remember there were 6, just so you know where we're going, fourthly, take action. It might sound a bit odd, a bit kind of tautologous to say, how do we keep going and taking action? Well, we keep going by taking action. But I wanted to put this in as one of my points because psychologists agree, those that are, there's quite a lot of psychology now around climate grief and climate anxiety, and in other areas of life as well, that one of the best things that we can do when we are feeling in despair is to do something. And it might be a tiny thing, but when we do something, we are taking a little bit of the power into our hands and we're breaking the inertia. It can be easy to think, what is the point? And I get this thrown at me, have had this thrown at me for many years. What is the point, when China's building its 5 coal power everyday power stations and whatever the stat is that people love to use? And what is the point when Trump is going against all of the commitments? And what is the point when our government is rowing back on net zero, and et cetera, et cetera? What is the point? What can little me do? Well, I want to say that there is a point. There are points to us taking action. One is that it is simply part of our discipleship and worship, our worship of the Lord of all creation. We touched on this just a little bit yesterday with one of the questions around sin and salvation and how it should be a natural part of being a Christian. Actually, we shouldn't be able to be a Christian, to be a follower of Jesus, without taking care of this world. So whether or not we are effective in what we do what we do out of a motivation of love, of discipleship, of worship, simply because it is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Because I can't follow the Word who was there in the beginning and through whom and by whom all things were created. I can't follow the living Word without also taking care of that which the Word created and was involved with in creation. So it's part of our discipleship and our worship. But also because we simply don't know. We don't know what difference our actions can take. It may feel like they do nothing. It may feel like there's no point in it, but we don't know. We don't know who's looking. When we make a small lifestyle change, we don't know who else is seeing that. Family or friends or work colleagues, and the ripple effect that comes from that. I know that a lot of what I do because I've seen others do. I've seen the example of others, and that's challenged me and has made me think, if they could do that, yeah, of course, why don't I do that as well? And then I know other people see me doing something, and that encourages them to do it as well. So you don't know who's watching and who might change as a result of the little things that you do. And you also don't know the longer term impact of the political actions that you take. But having been involved this last while, we're around Israel and Gaza, and being involved with trying to push the UK government to take a stronger stand against Israel's actions. And if you take a different view on that, that's absolutely fine. I'm very happy to discuss outside of here. As I've been talking with people, people say to me, but I've emailed my MP and I know the response I'll get. I just get a stock response. My MP never listens. But I keep saying, well, you just don't know what impact your email will have. You may feel like you just get the standard response back, which you do, but you may feel that, or you may not get anything back, but you don't know what conversations your MP is then going to be in, and what conversations that conversation might then lead to, and things build up, so we don't know. So we keep taking action in faith, in hope, because we just don't know. And we trust God that he will use our mustard seeds to grow something better. So how do we take action? Let's take action humbly. There are always things to learn. We often get it wrong. Let's bring humility into how we take action. Focus on what's in your power to change. You won't be able to change everything, but there will be some things that you can change, so focus on that. Know your skills. I think one of the best ways for us to keep going and not give up is for us to be doing the things that we naturally enjoy and with the skills that we naturally have, so that we enjoy what we're doing as part of our taking action. So know the skills that you have. You may be a brilliant people connector. You may be a fab tech person who can help with tech things that need doing. As you can tell, that's not me, because I didn't describe that very well. You may have a brilliant systems and process brain, and you can work with the visionaries and help them to get things shaped. Or you may be a visionary and God is placing some big picture stuff on you and you want to fly with that. Whatever it is, know your skills and bring those into the things that you do. Don't worry that you're not perfect. None of us are. Don't be put off by the detractors. When you do things, there will always be people who say, oh yeah, but don't you know that almonds come from here, or tofu is that, or don't you know, etc. Don't bother recycling because blah, blah, blah. There will always be detractors. And don't worry about that. Just ignore them and get on with what you're doing. And then know when you need a break. And that takes me on to my fifth point, which is remember the Sabbath. What I'm talking about here this morning is about how we keep taking action as Christians for this world and all of its inhabitants. And I imagine a good number of us here, like me, are activists, and we do keep taking action. But it's really important that we know when we need to take a break. We can't keep going. The Sabbath rhythm is built into the scriptural narrative. It's there in Genesis 1. It flows all the way through. It's one of the things that Jesus seems to keep hold of, even if he turns it around, as he seems to let go of other aspects of his Jewish faith at that time. But the Sabbath still remains important. It comes through further into the New Testament. It's there for a reason. God took a Sabbath and he told us to do the same. And I know that I can't keep going. I have to take a break. I have to stop. And learn yourself. I know that I won't go into them now, but I know the signs of when I'm needing to stop, when I'm getting overtired, when my brain is getting overwhelmed. So take a Sabbath. Build rhythms of rest into your lives. Of course, Sabbath in terms of church and our church patterns and retreat and daily prayer and so on are a part of that. But also other things too, such as creativity. I've been coming to appreciate how important, I'm a words-based person, but I've been learning how important creativity is in our lives, and what a role the creative arts can play in the climate movement, in the environmental movement. And when we are being creative in whatever way that might be, there are parts of our brain that get unlocked. It's fascinating when you start to read into the brain science behind it. Parts of our brain that get unlocked, that don't get unlocked otherwise. And that releases particular chemicals, and it can release fresh ideas, new ways of thinking. It can unlock blockages that are in us. So if you are, we're all creative people in different ways. So embrace that. Take a Sabbath, remember the Sabbath. Find ways to laugh and to rest, and look after your physical self. I know you didn't come here today for a lecture on exercise and healthy eating, so I won't give you that. But I do actually think those things are really important in how we look after ourselves so that we can stay mentally in a good place, so that we can then keep taking care of the world and of others that are around us. So look after yourself. It's not indulgent. It can become indulgent. It doesn't need to be indulgent. It's a way of keeping ourselves in a good place so that we can take care of others. And then finally, connect with nature. And this could be part of the Sabbath. One of the ways, I think, by which we can keep the Sabbath is by connecting with nature. But for me, it's such an important part, I wanted to make it a separate point. I was in the West Bank earlier this year, meeting with the director of one of the organisations that we support that works in the West Bank and also into Gaza, providing medical care and providing food as that became as that became available. And I went for lunch, Nada, his name was, I went for lunch with him, and we were sitting just outside Bethlehem, sitting in this restaurant, surrounded by men smoking shisha, eating falafels and things. And I've got to be honest, it was a pretty depressing lunch. And he was telling us about the situation in Gaza, what his staff were going through, how he was trying to support them. And it was a pretty sobering and depressing lunch. And as we began to get to the end of lunch, I said to him, and how do you keep going in the midst of all of this? And his face lit up. For the first time that lunch, I saw him smile. And he said, my garden. He said, I garden every morning before I come to work. And he said he has a little place to sit, he has his prayer time out there, and he gardens. He said, I put my hands in the soil and I lift my eyes up to see the glory. I just thought, wow, what an example of the power of being out in the natural world that God has created. And I touched on this yesterday, didn't I, when I talked about the vicar who said he was ashamed to admit that he encountered God in nature. And I was like, why would you feel that's something you've got to admit? Of course you do, because God has created that nature. It's imbued with God's presence, so of course you encountered God there. And I think there is a Christian nature spirituality that we need to recover and not be shy of, not be afraid of. There is a deeper connection between ourselves and the rest of nature that I think as Christians we have shied away from and that we need to learn more about. It will be the experience of all of us that nature is a healer, is a comforter. We know, don't we, that when we get outside and spend time in the natural world, that we change. Our brain changes, our well-being changes. There's so much scientific research around that now that I don't need to go into all of that. We've been learning, particularly through COVID, just the power of being outdoors. So I want to encourage you to get out more as one of the best ways to keep going in a world in crisis. I try and go for a walk, even if it's just a short walk every day if I can, and to find a way to get outside into nature every day. I live in a city, so, you know, it's not necessarily about going for a huge hike out in the wilderness somewhere, but just finding ways to connect with nature. Pay attention. And I'm going to say, talk to her. I'm going to encourage you to get outside and to talk to nature. Talk to the trees that are in your garden. Talk to the bees that you see there. Talk when you go into the woods. If you've not read a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, I really recommend that you do. Not coming from a Christian perspective, but I think there's so much Christian richness that we can bring in to Robin Wall Kimmerer, into what she talks about there. So connecting with nature, I think, is one of the ways by which we can be comforted and sustained to keep taking action. So let me conclude. We are here thinking about our mission in God's world, standing underneath this amazing earth. But it's an earth that is in crisis, isn't it? And maybe there might be another version of this that shows the reality of what our world looks like today as it drowns in plastic, the weather patterns change, crops fail, coral reefs bleach, species die, etc., etc. How do we keep going and not just sink into despair? Let's hold on to our vision, not be scared to acknowledge the pain, find your community, take action, remember the Sabbath, and connect with nature. And I'm going to stop there.
Thank you. Wonderful. What a fantastic introduction to the day. Really very, very helpful. We're now moving into seminars. We're going to have 2 sessions of seminars, and then lunch, and then a 3rd session. There are basically 3 themes that we're going to be covering in our seminars. Firstly, we're going to be thinking about practical. What can we do? That's session 1. And there are 2 options. You can go for Eco Church getting started, or you can go for Eco Church going for gold. So whichever one of those makes more sense for you, you can find them either in the Jesus Chapel or in the South Transept. In the 2nd session, we're going to be thinking theologically. And so again, have a look at the sessions, and those will either be in the South Transept or in the Jesus Chapel. And then we're going to have lunch. I'll be doing timekeeping, so don't have to worry about that. I'll kind of kick us into gear to go where we need to go next. But if you'd like to stand up, take your cup with you, take your belongings with you. You'll have noticed this is a public building. So take everything with you and start making your way to those sessions. And thank you, seminar leaders, for doing all that you're doing in the next 2 hours.